The historical figure, a woman of immense power. Elizabeth Báthory, 1560 to 1614, was not just a noblewoman. She was one of the most powerful and wealthy figures in Renaissance Hungary. She was born into the renowned Báthory family, which produced kings and princes of Transylvania. She was highly educated, intelligent, and married to the ferocious warrior Ferenc Nadasdy, a national hero known as the Black Knight of Hungary. While Ferenc was away at war, Elizabeth managed their vast estates, a role that required significant administrative skill and ruthlessness. This power and autonomy were highly unusual for a woman of her time and would later become a key factor in her downfall, the crimes, a documented reign of terror. The legend of bathing in blood often overshadows the extensively documented and equally horrifying reality of her crimes. The primary source of evidence comes from the trials of 1610 to 1611, which included testimony from hundreds of witnesses, confessions from her accomplices, and physical evidence from Countess Castle. The victims were almost exclusively young peasant girls and women from the surrounding villages, many of whom were lured to the castle with promises of well-paid work as maidservants. Some were the daughters of lesser nobility, sent to her for finishing and education. The methods and motivations, the testimonies paint a picture of sustained, sadistic cruelty. The alleged motivations were a complex mix of sadism. She and her inner circle of accomplices, her nurse, a dwarf, and a laundress, seemed to derive pleasure from the torture. Power and impunity. As the lady of the castle, she believed she was untouchable and could act without consequence on her own property. Psychological instability. Inbred family lines, common among nobility at the time, and the harsh realities of the era may have contributed to severe mental illness. Severe beatings, whipping girls to death with barbed whips. Burning, using red-hot irons, pokers, and even pressing heated coins onto their skin. Stabbing and cutting, using needles, scissors, and other sharp objects. Starvation and exposure, leaving girls naked in the snow to be hosed with cold water until they froze to death. Covering in honey, tying a girl up, covering her in honey, and leaving her to be devoured by insects. The official count from the trial listed 80 victims, but some witnesses speculated the number could be as high as 600, though this is likely an exaggeration. The key to understanding the Báthory story lies in her trial and punishment. For years, the torture was an open secret. It was only when she began to target the daughters of the lesser nobility that powerful forces decided to act. This was no longer about disposable peasant girls. She was threatening the social order. King Matthias II of Hungary, who was also deeply in debt to the Báthory family, ordered an investigation. Her arrest in 1610 was a political masterstroke. The punishment: her 4 accomplices were tried, convicted, and brutally executed. However, Elizabeth Báthory, due to her high birth, was never formally tried. A sentence was handed down without her presence. She was walled alive in a set of rooms within Countess Castle. A small slot was left for food and air. She remained there for 3.5 years until she was found dead on August 21, 1614. The blood-bathing myth. Did it really happen? This is the core of the legend, and it is almost certainly not true. No trial testimony. The most compelling evidence against the myth is its complete absence from the massive trial records. With over 300 witnesses and detailed confessions describing every other imaginable atrocity, not a single person mentioned her bathing in or drinking blood. Later edition. The story first appeared in print over 100 years after her death, in a Jesuit scholar's book in 1729. It was a sensationalist piece of propaganda written long after the fact, with no contemporary sources to back it up. Political and folkloric smear. The myth served multiple purposes. For her political enemies, it painted her as a monster beyond redemption, justifying their seizure of her property. For the common people, it wove a terrifying folktale that explained her desire for youth and beauty, a common theme in witchcraft and vampire legends, the likely origin of the myth. A popular theory suggests a linguistic or metaphorical misunderstanding. It's possible that a witness, seeing the blood-spattered Countess after a torture session, or hearing her say something like, "This blood will keep me young," led to a literal interpretation that was then exaggerated over the decades into the full-blown legend. The true story of Elizabeth Báthory is not one of a vampire countess bathing in virgin blood to preserve her youth. It is a far more human, and in some ways more terrifying story. It is about the absolute corruption of absolute power, the brutal class dynamics of the era where peasant lives were considered worthless, and the political machinations that used a woman's crimes as a pretext for theft and consolidation of power. The Bloody Bride of Hungary was a sadistic, brutal serial killer who tortured and murdered countless young women. The legend of the bloodbaths is a grotesque and enduring folklore that grew around her very real crimes, forever cementing her name in history as one of the world's most prolific and monstrous murderers.